Hello everyone, this is PD. Welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to talk about hotbar placement, hotkey, keybinds, and everything related so that you can play your job better. I believe this is the key category. This is the key kind of understanding in this game in order to play your job better and as best as possible and as easily as possible. I would like to mention that I am by no means like an absolute top ranked player in this game. I have parsed rather well in a lot of the fights I've participated in, getting orange in basically all of them. So I think I have a good understanding of how to perform well in this game and how to do it easily, and I've also been able to do it on a lot of different jobs. So I feel comfortable playing almost any job in this game that I have at level 80, which is most of them. So this video should help you play a lot of different jobs well and intuitively at the high level. I think this video can apply to players of all skill levels, but it should be targeted towards players that are interested in finding ways to improve their game. So without further ado, let's get into some of this stuff. The first thing I want to mention is useful to new players. It's exactly how many hotkeys you will need basically at the end game for level 80 jobs, and we're going to go up to the upper end and the lower end. So I think the jobs that require the least hotkeys is, for example, Warrior. Will only ask for about 25 or so hotkeys on your hotbar if you want to put all of your abilities on your hotbar. And some other jobs like Scholar, for example, or even Gunbreaker here, can ask for a lot more abilities to be put on your hotbar. We're looking at 32 right here for Gunbreaker. So if you want to be able to assign all of your keys to a hotbar, you're looking at 16 hotkeys with one modifier is your most ideal setup to set up on a keyboard. What I mean by modifiers, for example, control is the default in this game. You can press 1 to activate the first ability on your hotbar, or you can hold control and press 1 to activate that key modified to the control hotbar. What I like to do is, here on Gunbreaker, as I'm showing here, is set up 28 hotkeys and just switch between what weapon skills I'll need depending on the duty I'll be entering. And if it asks to use AoE abilities, I will put them on my hotbar so that I can press those abilities more often. If I'm doing a single target savage duty, then I won't need those abilities there, and I can just leave them there on the side to be clicked if absolutely necessary. So this is my preferred setup, but if you aren't the type who likes to use hotkeys for every single button, you don't need to, but I would recommend your primary method of inputting commands to your character for your GCDs and whatnot to be through the keyboard. I think it's best to free up the mouse to control movement at a much more precise level. That's my opinion. The first thing I like to do when deciding where to put an ability on a hotbar is, do I need to think about this move before I press another move? So a good example of this is Gnashing Fang and Burst Strike on the Gunbreaker class. Every time I Burst Strike using a Gunbreaker charge, I will want to Gnashing Fang in general if I have it off cooldown. So whenever I see this glowing line over my Burst Strike, I know that I can use this ability, but I don't want to if Gnashing Fang is available. So if Burst Strike is right here and I'm about to press it, and there's no way I'm going to press it while Gnashing Fang is on cooldown. But if Gnashing Fang were all the way over here on my hotbar, and I had Shirk up here, for example, then I could easily press Burst Strike by accident and not notice that Gnashing Fang is off cooldown. So this is why putting moves that have priority over other moves next to each other is I think, a very effective strategy. Another example of this is using Living Shadow over Bloodspiller for Dark Knight, or for Bard, for example, using Refulgent, or I think Straight Shot over Burst Shot whenever it's ready. So you don't want to be using the first move if the second move is available. So for that reason, I like to put these moves right next to each other. The second thing I would consider when placing moves on a hotbar is move sequences. It wouldn't make sense, for example, on Monk to start with Boot Shine, and then you go into Raptor form, and your Raptor form abilities are on 3, but your Curl form abilities are on 2. So it would be intuitive to do, and I think most players set things up like this, but it's intuitive to go from 1, 2 to 3, right? So I like to set up my hotbar like this for a monk, for example. So we'll have a smooth 1, 2, 3 rotation logically, because these are move sequences. So the move sequence is going to tell us to put boot shine, true strike, and snap punch. But every time I press boot shine, I'm not sure if I want to press boot shine or dragon kick, depending on the last one I pressed. So I can press dragon kick to start, and I see that my buffs don't have a buff from twin snakes, so I can press twin snakes. And then I see my dummy doesn't have a debuff yet, so I press demolish instead of snap punch. And I'm always looking at this column and deciding which one do I need to press. So right now I need to press dragon kicks because I don't have leaden fist yet. I ran out of the buff, so I pressed twin snakes again. I'm about to run out of demolish, so I'm going to re-put up that buff. And then we can go back to boot shine. I'm coming over here, and so on and so forth. And I always have to just decide between these two moves, and they're right next to each other. What you don't want is to decide between moves that are on vastly different areas of the keyboard. So if my boot shine were on 1 and I needed to decide between that and G, then I have I need more time to figure out which button I need to press. And for a job that moves as fast as Monk does, it's not something you want. You need to be able to make these decisions quick and give yourself as much time as possible to execute the move correctly. So all I have to do is have my finger on 2 to decide between twin snakes or true strike, and then depending on which one I want, I can last second hold or not hold control to pick the right one. Another example here is on Ninja. I have a 1, 2, 3, the standard single target combo, spinning edge through Aeolian edge, and then just above that is armor crush. So depending on whether or not I need to extend my futon is whether or not I'll press 3 or 4, and I need to decide this perhaps within a single cooldown, and I would prefer to have these abilities right next to each other. So all I have to do is decide between pressing 3 and 4, and I have these abilities right next to each other every time, so I can make a decision more easily depending on what I need for that moment. If you properly take into consideration the sequence in which you press buttons during openers, for example, you will find yourself more easily capable of doing the difficult openers of certain jobs out there. Ninja, for example, I think has a really tough opener to get the hang of, but the way I've set up my hotbar is essentially a lot of the time I'm just rolling through one button to the next because they're right next to each other, and my hotbar guides me into deciding what button to press next, and it becomes a lot less thinking and a lot less memorization. So another factor I use to decide where to put moves on my hotbar is the frequency in which I'll be using the move. This is kind of hard to do when you're setting up a class. So what I've done and what I recommend players to do when they set up their job hotbars is sometimes you don't have a good idea of how often am I going to be pressing a move as a certain job. And what I've liked to do for this is simply go into any old fight, for example. We'll go to Ifrit and Garuda on Eden's Verse, and we'll just look at any old fight, and we'll see if there's a ninja here. I'm pretty sure I can filter based on ninja, but here we have a ninja who parsed a 99 on the Ifrit and Garuda fight on FF logs here. So I can open this up, and I can see here how often this player used certain moves. So moves that aren't even here, for example, you can consider putting very low in priority on your hotbars and kind of out of the way. You won't need them as much. Moves that are higher up, moves that we're using more frequently, should be closer to the buttons you find easier to press. So my hands always by WASD and 1, 2, 3 pretty regularly. So I'm interested in putting the moves I use most frequently by those numbers. So, for example, most commonly used moves is, we'll go short by cast. We have spinning edge, gust slash, alien edge. So this is your standard GCD cycle on Ninja. Then we have Bavakakra and Raiton, Armor Crush, Stream of the Dream, and so on and so forth. So if we look at my hotbar setup, I have obviously the GCD on the easiest 3 buttons for me to press. Raiton was used a lot, which is Control 4, very easy for me to press. Bavakakra is on 5, very easy for me to press. And obviously Mudras on 1, 2, and 3 are used very frequently, so they're very easy for me to press as well. And Ninjutsu being cast a lot as well. So again, favor putting the attacks you'll be using more frequently on easier to press hotkeys. This one should be pretty obvious, I think. But it's worth mentioning as a weight factor in where you decide to put abilities on your hotbar. Next factor we have in deciding where to place abilities on your hotbar is cooldown monitoring. Now, some players will like to create a new hotbar and just use that hotbar to track all abilities closely together. I don't like to do this. So what I prefer to do is simply put moves I keep track of cooldowns close to each other, and then I can just kind of refer to those moves whenever they come off cooldowns by looking in that general area of my hotbars. And that's also why I've assigned my hotbars into more of a a square orientation as opposed to a very long rectangle. When you have a very long rectangle and I'm pressing 1, 2, 3 to do my GCD, it's hard to monitor the abilities over on the 890 hotkeys on the very end of the rectangle because you're looking over here at the GCD sequence you're pressing. Whereas when I press 1, 2, 3, it's easier for me to monitor the hotkeys of Mug, Trick Attack, Bunshin, Dream Within a Dream, Shadow Fang, Kasatsu, Tenshi Jin, and Meisui. Those are essentially all the cooldown abilities on Ninja that I care about as far as doing damage. So they're all within, as you can see, they come down on this diagonal line over here. This comes into C, drops down over here. And it's just all these abilities kind of around this area right here for me that I set to be my cooldown monitoring zone. And I can kind of see them all close to each other here. It's pretty similar on other classes, so on Black Mage I'm observing Mana Font, Leyline Sharpcast, sometimes Swift Cast in this general area right here, Triple Cast as well, so I just need to look at these 6 squares, 5 squares because this one's blank, to monitor my cooldowns. And if I move to any class, it's the same kind of concept. I'm looking, if I look at Dark Knight for example, it's the same kind of concept. I'm monitoring Plunge, Delirium, Blood Weapon, Carven Split, Salted Earth, and Abyssal Drain. So these all right here, even Living Shadow, but they're all in the same general zone. You won't find them over here in the corner where I would have more trouble keeping track of that ability's cooldown. So I do have cooldowns that are not damage based, that are not in this zone. And on the tank classes, for example, you can see them here in Reprisal, Living Dead, Dark Missionary, Rampart, Shadow Wall, Dark Mind. These are all the mitigation abilities for this tank class. Unfortunately for us, all the tanks have exactly 7 mitigation abilities. And I have found it convenient to put them all right next to each other. With the exception of the Blackest Night. It's a little off center, but I found F to be easier to press than V, and this is a button I press a lot. So I prefer to put that on the F slot, considering the frequency of presses. So this is getting into my other... it's all going to depend on what you weight as more important in deciding where to put abilities on your hotbar. So going back to what we're getting into now is the similarity of functionality. Basically, zones of functionality is another weight factor you can use to determine where to place abilities on your hotbar. So down here in the bottom left is all of my mitigation, and it is for all of my tank classes. So on Paladin here, you can see I have the same mitigation setup on this class. And this is kind of getting into the final tip that I'm going to give, I think, which is having class overlap. It makes sense, obviously, for Reprisal on your Paladin to be the same as Reprisal on your Gunbreaker, Reprisal on your Dark Knight. But above this, I'm going to extend this to other kinds of abilities that operate similarly. So, for example, on Paladin, we have Fight or Flight, increasing physical damage by 25%. So I've assigned this to the 5 hotkey, and on Gunbreaker, there's a very similar ability in No Mercy, increasing his damage by 20%. They're both 60-second cooldowns, and they both have a very similar functionality, and I put both of them on 5. So it's easier to switch between jobs and play them if you have this overlapping functionality. My Rough Divide, my Gap Closer, is the same on every job, Control 4. Also an ability I monitor quickly, or monitor frequently, because the cooldown is something you need to keep track of. It's a pretty important move to monitor in the fight, so it's like smack dab in the middle of my hotbar, right here in my cooldown monitoring zone. Another example of this is my self-healing abilities are always on Control F, so Second Wind on DPS classes, and on tank classes like Warrior, for example, Equilibrium, and Regen on Gunbreaker. My Black Mage's Mana Ward is the same as my Ninja's Shade Shift. Bloodbath is the same on all melee DPS classes, as is Feint. I'm going to make a quick note on healers here because I haven't really talked about healers. Healers, I recommend setting up your healer hotbar as if you're prioritizing damage in general, because your broil or your glare or whatever you're casting, stone, what have you, is generally your filler spell as this job, and you're going to be pressing it a lot. If I can pull up again here, what a healer is doing in a Savage raid. Granted, these are speed kills, but it doesn't look that different from your like average mid-core static group or anything of the like, or even rolettes for that matter. If you're doing dungeons, you may be using more AoE spells, but I'd still put my most commonly pressed filler spell as Broil, probably for the Scholar. So maybe this percentage goes down, but you can see the difference in how often this move is cast as opposed to any other move. I would essentially be prioritizing your hotbars to be efficient at dealing damage as opposed to spamming single target heals, for example, because that's kind of an uncommon spell sequence as a healer. So on the healer class, you'll notice I have Broil and Ruin, and my cooldowns in Aether Flow, which I'll be pressing a lot, Energy Drain, which I'll be pressing a lot, and then a lot of cooldown monitoring in this area over here, between XCOG down to Lucid Dreams, and over here over to Summon Seraph, but never reaching into the bottom row. So I think applying a lot of the principles together explains a lot of how my Black Mage hotbar is set up and how it's become a very easy job for me to play following these principles. I essentially just get to move from pressing 1 to 5 down the line and then going back to 1 and continuously moving through my rotation that way, making slight deviations along the way and using a few forks in logic depending on the current situation to choose between spells. So if I can go into a little bit more detail, we start on Blizzard 3 over here in the top left, and then we move into Thunder 3, and then we switch into our Fire phase here in the middle, and then when we need to, situationally, we'll press 4 or 5 to either end the Fire phase or keep it going with Fire 4 or Despair, respectively. And after I cast Despair, at the very end, I have Mana Font sitting right next to that ability, which will tell me if I can continue my Fire phase after I'm completely depleted from mana. Having everything right next to the spell I'm casting that I care about tells me more easily what spell I'm going to be casting next. So, for example, I just cast Despair there and then jumped into Thundercloud, immediately popping Mana Font because I saw it was off cooldown because it's right next to my Despair. In addition to this, I have all 4 of my OGCD cooldown abilities right next to each other in Triple Cast, Mana Font, Ley Lines, and Sharp Cast. Having them all right next to each other lets me keep track of those abilities from when they're off cooldown very easily. And my favorite part about this is, well, first there's Fire 3, which I'm always supposed to cast Triple Cast after it, essentially, and I have Triple Cast right next to Fire 3. In case it's off cooldown and I just cast Fire 3, I can press that ability. It's kind of similar to how Despair is working in this rotation. But like I was saying, my favorite part about this is when I switch to the Ice phase, I have in the same column my Thunder, my Blizzard 4, and my Xenoglossy. They're all right next to each other, and depending on the situation, depending on how long I have left on my Thundercloud proc buff, and how long the debuff is lasting, how much is left on the target, I can press Thunder if I need to, I can press Blizzard 4 if I need an extra filler, and I can press Xenoglossy if I need extra filler. So all those are in a line for me to decide what to use on the fly, all for the Ice phase, and that's where I can focus my attention during that period of time. And after that, move to the column to the right to start Fire phase with Fire 3 and the Triple Cast. I think Black Mage players can understand how this is set up, and I think it's really intuitive this way. I think most black mage players have something similar to this, but I really like what I've done with this setup, and I think this really captures a lot of the strategies I was talking about. The last thing I'll talk about is not really hotbar related, but you'll do notice on my HUD that I have my buffs right here above my hotbars and my enemy target right here next to my hotbars. I've tried to scrunch things together so that when I look at the screen and I'm pressing I typically look at my hotbar. That's the kind of player I am. And if I can have as much information that I need close to my hotbar, I can make better decisions when I decide what ability that I'm going to use. That means, you know, when I have no debuff active, I see I can press demolish. I don't need to look all the way up in the top middle of the screen to make that decision. When I see I don't have leaden fist, I just press dragon kick. When I see twin snakes is running out, I can press twin snakes and snap punch and so on and so forth. The decisions I make here are easier and more quickly can be made quicker because the information is more closely put together. There's something you have to keep in mind if you want to set up your HUD to be a similar kind of style. Another thing you can keep in mind is whenever you assign a ability to a hotkey, it should work well with the other buttons you plan on pressing at the same time. One of the biggest examples of this that I find is True North. True North, whenever you're a monk or melee DPS who's trying to properly flank or hit the rear of the target, you're going to be strafing left or right, pressing A or D, typically, depending on your keybind set. If you are doing this and you realize, let's say you're over here and you start to flank by pressing your right strafe, holding D, you might not make it in time if you're all the way in front of the boss over here or something like that. And if you start to flank by holding D and your True North were at C, it would be hard to say, oh crap, I'm not going to make it. I need to hit True North before I attack with my next ability, because you're holding D. You'd have to stop holding D and give up on hitting the rear of the target if that's what you were aiming for. So if you're strafing and you realize you're not going to be able to hit the target, you want to be able to hit at the proper angle. You want to be able to True North without giving up your desired positional movement. So that's why I like having True North on X or anything that my middle finger can hit, so that I can strafe with my ring and index finger while I can activate True North with my middle finger. I hope that makes sense. This is more advanced, and you can do stranger finger placements to compensate for this if you choose to. For example, using your thumb to press C if you're holding D to strafe right, for example. But I prefer not to make that difficulty on myself and prefer to simply place True North here. It's also a cooldown that I don't need to track like other abilities, so it can stay out of the way of my other cooldown monitoring section by being over here on X. So if you take the time to set this kind of stuff up, you will see very improved results if you stick with it. I do think it's worth the time to do this kind of thing. I do think it's the most effective way to improve your game in a short amount of time. You just have to take a little bit of time to get used to a new keybind set, perhaps, new hotkey layout, new hotbars, but it's not that bad once you do, and you'll pat yourself on the back when you do and you get those good parses or you play a lot better than you used to. Alright guys, thanks for watching. That's everything I have on hotkeys and hotbars and setting up your jobs appropriately. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. If this video helped you, I would appreciate a like. And if you'd like to see more content from me in the future, subscribe would help. Thanks a lot guys. Take it easy.